Stephen Edwin King is an American author of horror, supernatural fiction, suspense, crime, science fiction, and fantasy novels. His books have sold more than 350 million copies, and many have been adapted into films, television series, miniseries, and comic books. Check the link in the description below to get his top books in audiobook format for free.
Thank you. Oh, man. Sit down, sit down. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I quoted Benjamin. Woo! Hey,
We're here and we're alive.
I quoted Benjamin Percy in Esquire magazine, and he mentioned something, Stephen, that your mother used to say, and I will preface this by saying Benjamin Percy said, nobody understands what frightens Americans any more than this guy sitting right here. So, it's a good thing he's here so soon after Halloween. Perfect timing. But his mother...
I have to say something to Lee.
Yeah.
I was going through some insurance actuarial figures, and for car insurance, 1 in every 50 people, when they come to an event like this, forget to lock their car. And anybody could get into the back. And I don't say that that's going to happen or anything,
Yeah.
but somebody could. And it's almost like a public service. So if you see a face in your rearview mirror, and here's the thing.
Yeah.
Everybody laughs about it when they're all together. But sooner or later, you'll be by yourself. Okay.
Well,
that's the levity for the evening.
Yes, your mother used to tell you that if you would think of the thing that frightens you most and say it out loud, then probably it would not come true.
That's right.
Have you found that to be the case? So say it out loud. No one will break into my car.
No. No one will break into your car, but if you've got an opaque shower curtain when you go in... That's it, though. If I say those things, I won't really have to check my shower curtain when I go back to the hotel, at least more than once or twice. But it's true, she did say that. If you think of the worst thing, it won't happen. Just say it out loud, and I made sort of a career of that. You know, people say, what scares you? And it's everything. Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, you know, it puts me in mind...
You're not too scary, but then... I'm always waiting for that gotcha question, so it is a little scary.
Well, it puts me in mind of another novelist, Richard Congdon, who wrote The Manchurian Candidate, spent the last part of his life in Dallas, and he kept a sign in front of his desk at all times which said this: think of the worst you can possibly imagine, and it is probably even worse than that. Do you think that's true?
I love an optimist. You know what? I think most lives are cheerful and kind of bright, but every life has some certain dark corners. And one of the things that I've noticed is when these things do happen, they seem to happen in clusters. You know, it's like there's sunny day after sunny day, and then a real shit shower, where everything goes wrong at one time. But we're mortal creatures, and we understand that terrible things happen from time to time, and books and movies are one way that we get a chance to have a catharsis for that experience and get it out in a way that's harmless.
Well, a terrible thing did happen in Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963. And in doing your research for this book, you became all but convinced that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Yeah.
What persuaded you of that?
The gun. Mostly it's the gun. It's, if you know, there was that Deep Throat in the Watergate book and movie told Woodward and Bernstein, follow the money.
It turned out to be Mark Felt.
Yeah, it turned out to be Mark Felt. In terms of the assassination of President Kennedy, it's a case of follow the gun. It was Oswald who ordered the gun, mail-ordered the gun from Chicago. It was Oswald who picked the gun up at the post office in Dallas. It was Oswald who was photographed with that gun by his wife in the backyard, with the pistol that he used to kill Officer Tippit in his belt. He had the gun in one hand, the Daily Worker in the other. It was Oswald who used the gun to take a shot at Edwin Walker, and it was Oswald who hid the gun in the Texas Book Depository and then killed J.D. Tippit with the gun, so with his pistol, so which was also a mail-order gun. So you follow the gun, and it's Occam's razor that says 99 times out of 100, the simplest explanation is the true explanation. One of the things about going on this tour, we were talking about fear, you know. One of the things that I'm afraid of, you know the guy in the State of the Union address that Obama gave that jumped up and said, "You lie"?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think he was from
I'm
South
afraid that the
Carolina.
conspiracy people will be up there saying, "You lie. Oswald was a clone. He was, you know, teleported to Earth by the Martians and then taken away." But, you know, the fact is, Marina Oswald was convinced enough that her husband had been replaced by a double that the crafty Russians, you know, had put in place, that the body was exhumed, and they did the DNA, and yes, it was Oswald. But, you know, there's a quote at the beginning of the book from Norman Mailer to the effect of, if the most powerful man in the world could be killed in the midst of his legions and his security, then the world we live in is absurd. And I think a lot of the conspiracy theorists are reacting directly to that idea that it must have been a conspiracy, because it's too horrible to think that the person that William Manchester called the wretched waif could just do this and change the course of history. But I'm 98% sure. Jake in the book says, I'm 98% sure that it's Oswald, and I'm about, 95, he says, but I'm 98% sure.
Yes, Norman Mailer did say it was unassimilable, such a thing. If it were true, then the universe is absurd. And yet in the novel, I guess it's Jake, who also becomes George when he goes back to 1958 in Dallas, who says that coincidences are rare. And in fact, there is a great machine whose fabulous gears are turning. That's fate, I suppose. Which is your own personal view, the absurdity of the universe or the intelligent design of the universe?
Well, I'm an agnostic on the subject. I don't know which way it goes, but it does seem to me as though there are forces that determine, let's say, 95 to 98% of our lives, and the rest of it is wild. I heard a story just before I came on this tour that I immediately related to what happened on that day. There was a guy somewhere in the South who won $1 million on a scratch ticket. And, you know, the human interest thing, the press comes along, and some TV station in Arkansas or something said, well, we want to recreate this, you know, for a human interest story on the news. So they took him out to the convenience store where he bought the scratch ticket. You know where the story's going, don't you? They set up the cameras, and the same clerk sells him the same kind of ticket, and he scratches it, and he says, "Holy shit!" And the producer's immediately like, cut. You can't say that. You can say, gosh, or something like that. He said, you don't understand. I just won $100,000. Right? And for Oswald to have done what he did, and this is another reason that the conspiracy theorists choke on Oswald, you have to accept the fact that he got the job at the depository before Kennedy even knew he was coming to Dallas. He knew that he was going to tour the South and he needed to shore up his support. But it's just like there are a number of happenstances that make it very, very improbable that it happened just the way it did. The night before, Oswald and his wife were really separated at that point. And Marina Oswald was living with a woman named Ruth Payne in Irving, Texas. And Oswald had a 2-year-old daughter named June, and she was pregnant with their second child. And she had the kid. Oswald didn't want to go to the hospital. He didn't want to take her to the hospital because he was afraid they'd try to make him pay. He was a little shit, basically, in a lot of ways. I tried to humanize him in the book, and everybody deserves that because he was a human being, and he did have his good side. It was small, right? A small good side, but a good side. But his habit was to come to the Payne house on the weekends and spend the weekend with Marina and his children, and then he would go back. But on the day before the assassination, which was a Thursday, he came a day early. And partially, I think, it was to get the gun, but I think also, to a large extent, it was because he still hadn't made up his mind, even at that last point, at that late point. So that night, he and Marina were in bed together. And they had no sexual relations or anything like that. But what Lee said was, is there a chance? Could we try again? And she said no, and she turned her back. And the next morning when he got up, he took off his wedding ring and put it in a teacup and took all the money that he had in his pockets and he put that in the teacup and he left. And again, you have to wonder what would have happened if she had said, yes, Lee, we'll try one more time. So a number of different events led up to that, and it makes it tough to believe. But on the other hand, nobody who wins the lottery, if you win a big prize on the lottery and you call people up on the phone, the first thing they say is, you're lying. That can't happen to you. Well, but somebody wins the lottery every day.
There is a line that comes up over and over in this book, and it is, the past is obdurate. What does that mean?
Well, in the course of the book, it means...
First of all, what does obdurate mean?
Obdurate means hard. Obdurate means... Jake at one point describes living in the past as living in a nylon stocking. You can push and it will give, and if you try really hard, you can rip it and get through. But mostly it's this sort of yielding thing that will then snap back into its original shape. And he finds out in the course of his adventures in the past that the more you're going to change the future by some given act, the tougher the past will try to protect itself. Which makes it, a good device for, building the suspense up to the point where all the characters you've come to know and love all die.
Yes. Yes, I had a very depressing lunch today, finishing up your book. You also say the past harmonizes, and by that you mean history repeats itself. History repeats itself.
In the course of the book, we're playing with some fantasy elements so that I was able to heighten that, but I think history does repeat itself. I'm just amazed. First of all, let me say that I spent some time in Dallas, and I went to the Sixth Floor Museum, and we went around to a number of the different sites, Greenville Avenue, which was quite the hotsy-totsy place back in the 60s. It's a little more yuppied up nowadays, but we went around to where General Walker lived. We went to a number of different places. But I'm not a Dallas resident, I'm a New Englander, and I never spent a day working on this book where I didn't feel like a carpetbagger, somebody who's out of place. And that's not such a bad thing. You try to keep it in mind, and it keeps you a little bit humble. But I made a number of goofs about that. I misspelled Colleen. It has one L instead, and nobody's bad but my bad. I looked it up, I looked right at it on Google, and then I went and I misspelled it, and the copy editor didn't pick it up or anything. But the one that really speaks to how little you can know a place until you spend some time there is there's a radio station that everybody listens to in Dallas. At the time, it was a big deal. It was a big top 40 station, KLIF. And I assume, not being from Dallas, that probably the kids would go around calling it K-Life. And then Joy Tipping in an interview told me, well,
she's with the Dallas Morning News. Gave you a great review here tonight.
It was great. It was great. I'm going to wax her car for a year after that review. She's going to send her shoes to my house to get polished. So, no, not really, Joey, not really. But I found out that the station is in Oak Cliff, and everybody calls it Cliff instead of K-Life, so. And we were talking about the past harmonizing, and I have no idea how the hell I got off on that. But I felt the need to confess.
Well, as long as you're confessing, you're really pretty tough on Dallas. You said that in 1963, and I'm not arguing with this, that it was a haunted city, a hateful city. Mm-hmm. And what was haunting Dallas then, do you think? Extremism.
And in Dallas, it was the right wing was extremely powerful at that time. And I know what I was going to say. We were talking about the past harmonizing, and one of the things that came up was a question about, there's a mention of a Tea Party society in the book, and I'm pretty sure that they were the people who paid for a billboard that was in Dallas that said impeach Earl Warren. But the New York Magazine wanted to do a piece with that, and the fact checker came along and said, well, can you verify that? So I couldn't remember where I found it. A novel isn't like a research paper where you footnote everything, so I didn't, and if you saw my office, oh my God. My idea of a filing system is get a sticky note and stick it in the bathroom where you're going to see it when you sit down, you know. Everything is everywhere. So I got on the computer and I looked at a bunch of videos, and it's amazing to look at videos of Dallas political action in the early 60s. Adlai Stevenson was spat upon and hit with signs when he came to Dallas. A housewife's garden party spat on Lady Bird Johnson. When Kennedy landed at Love Field, there were signs that said, help JFK stamp out democracy. And one of the things that I found was a televangelist named Billy James Hargis. And last night I saw a video of him giving a speech about how socialism and communism were the same thing, and with just too much power in Washington and the federal government trying to run things. And every word out of his mouth could have been spoken by Tea Party people today. One of the reasons, he has a scary idea, all right. You can take them out, but you can't bring them home or something. What am I saying? Anyway, the thing is, when we talk about the past harmonizing, I'd had this idea originally in 1971, and it came up into the surface of my mind again after Barack Obama was elected president, because there are so many parallels between Obama and Kennedy. The youth in both cases, the fact that they were both hated for certain reasons. Kennedy was a Catholic, Obama being African American, both with beautiful wives, both with beautiful children, both with short experience in the
Harvard.
Senate. Yeah, both Harvard. So the atmosphere of hate that has surrounded Obama from certain quarters reminded me very much of the atmosphere in Dallas at that time. But it wasn't just Dallas. There were a lot of places in the country, primarily in the South, because of the civil rights initiatives, that had no love for John Kennedy. Adlai Stevenson couldn't believe that he was going to come to Dallas because of what he'd faced here. And the last words that John Kennedy heard on earth were those of the wife of Governor John Connally, who turned to him in the limousine and said, "Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you." And then the shooting started.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, you know, Adlai Stevenson was hit in the head by a picket. That October 1963, he was coming out of a speech for UN Day. The UN was not liked here, as you can imagine. It was the wife of an insurance executive who hit him in the head with a picket. Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson were mobbed, crossing from the Baker to the Adolphus. Jake Epping stayed in the Adolphus in your novel.
Yeah.
And these were junior leaguers. These were young women.
That's right.
Prosperous, dressed in red, white, and blue. And afterwards, Lyndon Johnson said this: how can nice people, attractive people, be so discourteous and so desperate?
Yeah.
Why the desperation? Do you have any idea?
I think that they saw in Kennedy the possibility of a real change in America, and it scared the hell out of them. But I want to say something else about Dallas, too, and that is that if you look at the kind of scopes of that motorcade, what you see along Main Street are people who are almost in tears. They're so delighted to see the president and his wife. And their welcome in Texas was extremely warm. And you have to remember, and a lot of people have said this, a lot of historians and a lot of apologists, that the atmosphere in Dallas, which was driven to some degree by the newspapers who hated it, the atmosphere, the political atmosphere was very dark and very unpleasant. But really, there was only one Oswald, but one is all it takes. The other thing is, the Kennedy assassination, it seems to me, is interesting, and one of the reasons that it's so great to think about what might have happened if it hadn't happened is that it seemed to open the door on Pandora's box and let out, you know, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the murder of Fred Hampton, and then all the violence in the cities that followed that, and Vietnam, where millions of people were killed. Just thinking about it makes a feedback whine in my head. Did you hear that too? Usually, once I put on my tinfoil hat, it's all right.
And yet, your character, Jake Epping, who becomes George Amberson, wanted to change history. He felt that if JFK did not die, that LBJ would not be president, the Vietnam escalation would not have occurred, Bobby Kennedy would not have been assassinated, nor would Martin Luther King Jr. And yet,
no Patty Hearst kidnapping, no SLA.
Yes, exactly. So, and yet, as you spin ahead in your story, it doesn't turn out that way at all, given one strand of history repeating itself and perhaps not repeating itself in the way Jake had hoped. And what's the matter with you? Talk quickly before it happens again.
Things will never turn out the way that we think that they will. But everybody's had that question, particularly when something happens. I know that in 1999, I was on a walk and I got hit by a car. Well, it was a van, actually. The guy came up over the hill, and he had a couple of Rottweilers in the back, and they were fighting over his dinner, and instead of pulling over to separate them, he's driving like this, you know, and trying. So he got on the shoulder, and he hit me, and I was in the hospital for a long time, and for a while it looked like I might die, blah, 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 all that. Sympathy, sympathy, sympathy. Do you know what this is? This is the world's smallest violin playing My Heart Pumps Purple Piss for You. But what I'm saying is, it's impossible to look back on something like that and not say, if it had been 5 minutes earlier, it wouldn't have happened. If I'd left the house 5 minutes later, it wouldn't have happened. So you almost, I think everybody at one time or another has wished to turn the clock back, is what I'm saying, and change things. But we don't know what would happen if we did. Maybe if I had left the house 5 minutes later, I might have been killed instead of just hurt. We just can't tell. And my challenge with the book was first to decide whether or not I would let Jake succeed, and if he did succeed, what he would find when he went back to check.
You mentioned the newspapers. And you mentioned the Dallas Times-Herald, now gone, and you said in those days it was known as the Slimes Herald, because it was so boosteristic. I want to take up a little bit for it. Years later, I edited the editorial page of the Times-Herald, and perhaps you saw at the Sixth Floor Museum that Jim Lehrer worked for the Herald at that time, later became city editor. It was he who wrote the lead story that day in November, and his byline lasted the whole day and is on the wall of the museum. So I'm just wondering, you travel here now, you traveled here then. Do you see improvement in the paper that is here now, the Dallas Morning News, with whom I also have an association? I worked out everything I could. I was spoken of the Tower Center.
Why, me, yes, I think it's really an excellent newspaper.
Thank you.
No. You see a lot of differences. You see a lot of changes. It's a question for me. Let me ask you: Has Barack Obama been to Dallas?
He's been to Dallas, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, there's just. When I came, I didn't know exactly what I was going to find because Dallas has a reputation as a result of the shooting, and you get here and nobody's been anything but terrific to me. So, yeah, I would say. And you know, I was at a reception before this where you pay extra and you get to drink a little cheapo wine, and you know, we do the grip and grin thing, and well, some of you guys know, you were there, you know, everybody's got a cell phone camera, but I've done these things in other parts of the country where it's really scary, and this one was really good. Everybody's polite, everybody's nice.
Well, now, I want to tell you this. They are very polite in Dallas. They'll cut you off at the knees in Dallas, but they'll be very polite. So
well,
if I were you, I wouldn't count on too much.
One of the things that we've noticed in Dallas is that you change lanes, then you signal. It's a Texas thing, I think. The other thing that I noticed is that you say to somebody, well, where did you come from? And they'll tell you the name of the town, and you'll say, how far away is that? And they'll say, oh, 5 hours. Nobody talks in miles. They just talk. Oh, I came 7 hours. Stopped once to let Ma pee. God, it takes her a long time these days.
Well, time, as you know, is money. And
time is relative, and it repeats.
And money. And you said that in 1958, when Jake Epping arrived here as George Amberson, that business was God, everybody worshipped it, nobody understood it. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's changed? Well, I can tell you it hasn't.
I don't think it has, yes. I think it's really about the same thing, and I think the crash in 2008 in the stock market and the current recession shows that everybody is sort of running around and nobody really has a clue. Certainly I don't. I just write scary books.
Well, you've got a lot of material today. You wrote a book called Cell, and in it, everybody with a cell phone, everybody with a cell phone becomes a mindless murderer.
Right.
And you don't...
Let me tell you something about the cell phone. You're in the supermarket, right? Somebody comes on their cell phone. It's always the same thing. Yeah, where are you? Well, I'm in the supermarket listening to you. Well, go ahead.
You don't own a cell phone. You said it's a slave bracelet. Mm-hmm. You also said that people tire of their toys rather quickly. Are they going to tire of the cell phone?
No, I don't think that they will, but you're seeing a steady shift in the technology away from the cell phone as a cell phone. The ability to talk to people and go, where are you, in the supermarket or on the street corner has become secondary to texting, to social networking. One of the interesting things that's happened is the Arab Spring that we saw this year was driven by social media. And I think that the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Dallas and Occupy Bangor and Occupy everybody is driven by social media. And I really think that when a guy like Eric Cantor stands up and calls the Occupy people rabble or mobs, not only is he sounding an awful lot like the French aristocracy before the guillotine started to fall, but that it really is a stupid disregard and misunderstanding of what's going on and how powerful it is. You can't stop people who are getting together on these various media unless you shut the whole thing down, which they tried to do in Egypt, and it just made people more and more determined. So it's a force to be reckoned with, and it makes the cell phone, you know, look like the old Ma Bell crank with the thing that you hold to your head. But I don't Facebook and I don't twit. I'm just an old-fashioned guy.
Yeah. In 2000, you wrote a book called The Plant. It was serialized and it was put online. Everybody likes that too.
This is like somebody's going to say, play Freebird, you know? You guys are great, man.
You have said that you think that by 2013, 50% of the book market will be online, ebooks. Do you still believe that?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think that more and more people are going over to the screen. And I've got 3 kids, and my daughter, who's the oldest, is like totally electronically connected. But she's a Unitarian minister, and her specialty is communications, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, and she's terrific at it. But she's old school when it comes to books. She reads, you know, what the publishing people call P-books, paper books, as opposed to e-books. Both boys are total book people. I think that my older son, Joe, who's a novelist, heart-shaped box, horns, he's got a Nook and he's got an iPad. Well, shit, the world's got iPads. I got an iPad. And I got some great apps. I got some great games and stuff. But the best thing is I've got a Magic 8-Ball app. And I consult it before I do anything. But what I'm saying is this. I'm also someone who I can go, I'm AC/DC when it comes to books. I like my Kindle because I can make the letters big, but I think that the march of progress it makes it almost inevitable that sooner or later, I mean, try to find a Tower Records these days, you know, or something but there are still plenty of people out there that are old school that love vinyl, you know, that love the records, but it's a curiosity more than it is a practical item now.
You have written for Marvel comic books, and they're going online also. Moreover,
American Vampire, baby.
Yeah. Ooh. Moreover, you have said you prefer Batman to Superman.
Right.
Why?
Because see, they all do too. First, because Batman's a real guy, sort of. I mean, in the old comics, he used to be a real guy, and that was great. And in the new comics, he's like a little bit nuts. And I respect that. But Superman, I mean, how boring is Superman? I mean, the best they can do with Superman is kind of like make him kind of like neurotic or something. Also, the other thing, I've always sort of wondered how he and Lois Lane would have sex. Or, like, when Superman goes to the bathroom, is that like the poop of steel? What does he blow his nose on? I mean, does he blow his nose? Maybe he doesn't. Never mind. I like Batman better. Those questions don't come up with Batman.
Absolutely true.
I can't believe I'm talking about Superman. Never mind.
How did you find working with Michael Jackson? What's the secret of his magic and his hold on American culture?
Well, he's dead now.
True.
But I worked with Michael Jackson on a video, and it was sort of his comeback video when some of the allegations started to come out. And I was on the set of a miniseries of a book called The Stand. And, you know, we were talking before about how hard it is to believe certain things. One of the production assistants came up and said, you have a phone call. And I said, I'm a little bit busy right now. I'll just take a message. And he said, it's Michael Jackson. So I was curious. So I went into the trailer. And I was, you know, sort of thinking it was a joke. And I hear this voice say, Stephen, I want to make the scariest, most horrible, awful video that people will never forget. Will you help me? And I said, yes, Michael. But Michael called the house, and my wife said, Steve's not here. I can give you the number where he can be reached. And she gave him the number, and he called back 5 minutes later, and he was weeping. And he said to my wife, I'm so sorry, I tried to write the number on the carpet because I didn't have a pen, and the nap sprang back, or something. And it's not nice to laugh at a guy who's tremendously talented and passed away, but let's do it. So my experience with Michael Jackson was extremely brief and extremely weird, but the video did get made, and if you ask me which song, I can no longer remember, but it was sort of like Son of Thriller.
Okay. You had a great success with your novel, Under the Dome. And it was apocalyptic, really, and in a way foretelling what we're headed toward if we don't change the way we live, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Well, we all live under the dome, and that was sort of what I wanted to say in the book. Always at the top, I want to tell a story that people like. I want to entertain people. It's the way I'm wired up, and I want them to, if it's a long book, I want it to feel like a short book. And I'd love to have them finish it and say, gee, I wish there had been even more. That's the be-all and end-all. But, you know, beyond just entertainment, a story ought to be about something. And I wanted to write about diminishing resources and climate change and leaders who aren't up to the task of who behave as though they know the answers, but are really not up to the task of making the innovative decisions. So I just took one little town in Maine and I said, well, this is a little microcosm of America. Let's see what happens when the fuel runs out and the food runs out and the leaders are a little bit like Dick Cheney and George Bush, and see where we get. So I had a blast with that book. I did. I had a lot of fun.
Let's go back for a moment to LBJ. Dallas suffered from racism in 1958. As you write in your book, you have your guy, Ray Mack Johnson, from whom Jake tries to rent a garage apartment in North Dallas, and he's very difficult. That's when Jake moves to Jody, Texas, for a more congenial atmosphere. But we have to remember that LBJ did pass the great civil rights legislation. Voting rights, open housing, open accommodations. Do you think he'll get credit for this in time? Not to mention Medicare.
Yes, I think one of the great mysteries is how little credit he's gotten for those things. And when I went to work to try and imagine what the world would have been like had Kennedy lived, it's an interesting supposition to say that if Kennedy had lived, he almost certainly would have gotten a second term because he would have run against Barry Goldwater, and the country wasn't ready for Barry Goldwater, I don't believe, any more than they're ready for Rick Perry, for that matter. Just my feeling. There are three things I want to talk about, and I can't remember the third one. But, you know, there are a number of people that are over on that side. I don't think that they're really ready for prime time. But in the case of, so they weren't ready for Goldwater. So I think that we can say that if Kennedy had lived, and it's so, again, it goes back, it's so crazy. The weather forecast for Dallas that day was for rain. If there's rain, the bubble top is up on the limousine, and maybe Oswald isn't able to make that shot because he wasn't able to shoot Edwin Walker through the window, and the range was even closer, which gives fuel to the conspiracy people. But so it's by a hair's breadth that Kennedy is killed, Johnson becomes president. Kennedy was never really able to get inside the politics of the House and Senate. And in the same way that I think that Barack Obama has been unable to get inside the mechanics, neither man seemed able to find the levers that would move, well, in the case of Kennedy, it would have been probably Everett Dirksen. And in the case of Obama, it's Mitch McConnell and John Boehner. My wife calls him John Boner. But that's between us. I would never tell that to an actual audience. But when Kennedy was killed and Johnson became president, he knew all the right levers to pull. And the biggest one of all was to say, pass this legislation as a memorial to the slain president. And it did. So, yeah, Medicare, the civil rights initiatives.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
And that's really what's overshadowed Johnson's domestic accomplishments.
Early in the book, Jake lands in North Carolina, and he meets a couple of people named Marnie and Andy Cullum. Where did you get the name Cullum?
I actually grew up with some people who lived down the road whose names were Arlene and Dickie Cullum, and I wanted to put those people in the same area, so I stole the name.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Names are hard for me. It's hard to come up with good ones, so
yeah.
A lot of times.
Well, you came up with a very good one in that.
I did. It's a totally great name, yeah.
You often play in your movies. You've played a pastor at a funeral. You've played a pizza delivery man. You've played a reporter. If a movie is made of 11/22/63, who would you like to play?
Geez, if I could play anybody, I wouldn't mind playing that guy, Andy Cullum. But probably I just as soon keep out of it. My acting talents, I think it might be time to retire both the acting and the guitar playing sides of but I've had a lot of parts like Jordy Verrill in Creepshow, and so I got kind of typecast as this sort of country asshole kind of guy. And then a couple of years ago, a guy named Kurt Sutter came along and said, "Do you want to be in Sons of Anarchy?" He said, if you'll be in Sons of Anarchy, I'll put you on a big ass bike. And I said, I am so there. So I can be persuaded.
Good. Well, Stephen King, everybody rush home, read this book. You'll have a great evening. Thank you.
Yeah,
You've given us a wonderful time.
And thank you.
Thanks to all of you.
Stephen Edwin King is an American author of horror, supernatural fiction, suspense, crime, science fiction, and fantasy novels. His books have sold more than 350 million copies, and many have been adapted into films, television series, miniseries, and comic books. Check the link in the description below to get his top books in audiobook format for free.